You want me to follow you along with it?
No.
Okay.
So hello. She said I'm Julie Campbell, and I get to fill in tonight. And Aisha's letting me kind of practice. I'm going to be her one day, so I get to run through the material and work on my video. So thank you guys for letting me be the dry run, and somebody's got to go first, right? So tonight we're doing Unit 9. We're going to talk about basic contract law. It's just the basics of any type of contract. So you guys are going to get more in depth in the offer to purchase and contract and some of your lease options, that kind of thing. You're going to get more detail on those. So tonight we're just going to keep it basic though. So what types of contracts are we going to talk about tonight? We're going to talk about listing contracts. We're going to talk about buyer agency contracts. We're going to talk about sales contracts, option contracts, land installment contracts, leases. We've got a lot to talk about tonight. But all this is what's known as contract law. Okay? If you're following along this textbook on page 259, we're in Unit 9, so you can follow along that way. So, let's start with the basics. What is a contract? A contract is a legally enforceable promise or set of promises between legally competent parties supported by legal consideration to do or refrain from doing a legal act that must be performed and for what the law provides a remedy if a breach of promise occurs. Do we see a common theme in here? Legal, legal, legal.
You can
There's one
see.
more.
Perform.
Legal, 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 legal. This is legal stuff, right? What we're doing is these are legal binding contracts. Do you think it's important when you start working with buyers and sellers that they understand that this is a legal binding contract? I think it's important to have that conversation with them before they sign anything. You know, when we go to any website and we sign the terms and conditions, does anybody read them? If you do, I say good for you. I get through like 2 sentences and go on and say I accept to everything you have to say. And then they do something to make me mad and I say, but I didn't know that. And they say, you accepted, you know. That's a legal contract, you know. This is too. So, in order, there's several essential elements that all contracts must have, okay? So a contract must be voluntary. You can't force anybody into a contract. It must be a legally enforceable agreement or promise. Again, it's legal. You can't get into a legal contract something with an illegal nature, okay? They got to be made by legally competent parties. We'll talk more about that in just a minute. But minors are not legally able to enter into contract. People under the influence are not legally able to enter into a contract. It's got to be supported by legal consideration. You know, you can't offer something illegal for the purchase of a house, you know. It's got to be a legal consideration. Some kind of value that's legally sufficient to support a contract. And it's got to be for a legal act. Again, how many times have I said legal in the last? It's legal. So in a contract, to sum it up, a contract is agreement between at least 2 parties that's enforceable by law. All right, a court will hold it up in a court of law.
You heard for 2 seconds.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So there's different types of contracts. There's an express contract and an applied contract. An express contract, it's clear what is being offered. It's writing or oral, and it states a promise in a clear language. These are our real estate contracts. Okay, they're express. An applied contract would be an action or conduct. Behaviors leading parties to believe that an agreement exists. I think the best example I can think about is if you go out to dinner and you order a meal, you're basically saying, you bring me this meal and then I'll pay you for it. You know, you're not coming out and telling the waitress that, right? But she still takes your order. It's implied. Now, there's dine and dash. There's other ways around that too. But I think for the most part, we pretty much say we're going to pay for our dinner once we're done eating it. An express contract, and we'll get more into this in a bit too, but in North Carolina, we have the statute of frauds, which says that it has to be in writing. So while an express contract can be oral, just know that our real estate contracts must be in writing. The statute of frauds kind of takes over, okay? Contract can be bilateral or unilateral. So bilateral contract is an exchange between two parties. Seller says, I will sell you my house and give you title. Buyer says, I will give you X amount of dollars for your house and for that title. So two parties are promising to do something, okay? Seller's going to give title and buyer's going to pay for it. Both parties have responsibilities. Both parties are binding and enforceable, okay? In a unilateral contract, only one party promises to do something. And only one party is binding to it. I think a good example of that would be if I lost my dog and I put a sign up that said, if you find my dog, I'll give you $500. I think for real estate, the example that they give is that if a seller agrees to give the buyer 4 months to decide if he wants to buy their house, you know, the seller's saying you have 4 months to choose what you want to do. Now, the buyer doesn't have to buy the house in 4 months, right? He just has that time to decide. The seller's making a unilateral contract with him. Of course, again, our contracts are bilateral. Any questions so far? Yes?
What would be the scenario? What would be unilateral? What type of scenario?
So, like if the seller said, "You can buy. I'll give you 4 months to decide if you want to buy my house." The seller's making the promise to the buyer that he'll let him have 4 months to think about it. That's a long time to think about it, but he'll give him 4 months. The buyer doesn't have to buy it in 4 months, but the seller's telling him that he can have that time. Contracts are either executed or executory. I don't say that word right. Executed, they're done. They've been performed. An offer to purchase and contract is executed when the deed's been recorded at the courthouse. Executory, they're still working on it. So the contract to close process, where we're doing our inspections, we're getting the loan approval, we're doing the appraisal, that's all part of the process. Now you might hear about a contract being executed, an offer being executed, I should say. What they're referring to there is they're talking about it being signed. So once it's signed, it's executed, but it's still an executory contract because they still have work to do in the process to get to the courthouse. That's the goal. So let's talk about the validity of contracts. The valid contract has all the essentials that we just talked about. Remember, it's voluntary. What else do we say? Anybody?
Agreement.
It's legal, agreement, installation. That's a valid contract. A void contract has no legal effect. We're going to break these down a little bit further, talk a little bit more about them. In just a minute. Avoidable contract may be disaffirmed by one party.
It's like a breach of contract by one party.
Yep. We'll talk more about breach and contracts. And then an unenforceable party, nobody can sue anybody for performance. It's not forcible. It's an illegal contract, an illegal act. You can't sue somebody for not performing an illegal act. So if you guys have your textbook with you, if not, just make a note. But there's a good little chart on page 260. It's 9.1, and it kind of breaks down a little bit more about these classifications. So just to kind of break them down a little bit more ourselves, a valid contract, remember, it has all the legal elements and is fully enforceable. It's going to stand up in a court of law. So it meets all the essentials of a valid contract. A void theory, it lacks one or more of the elements, of the essential elements. So in theory, it never was a contract because maybe it was something for illegal. Well, again, we can't enforce that. So it was never legal to begin with, so they have nothing to support it, nothing to hold it up.
Like if they forge a signature,
Boom. That's a good question.
would it be void then?
So,
Like say the person is like,
if I sign for you just because?
no, like, say you're like a taker. Think about it.
And you don't have like power of attorney or
Yeah,
something?
there you go. You don't have power of attorney, but you're like the person that makes all the decisions for them.
That's,
And then if you sign their name, but they're not technically like a right mind, that would be a void contract.
yep, because we're lacking one of the elements. Yep. Avoidable contract, it has all the legal elements, but it may be rescinded or disaffirmed. This might be, because a contract with a minor could be avoidable contract. This might be the example that Brittany just gave us, that if somebody signed and didn't have POA, it's not legal to begin with, You can't sign for somebody without that legal right, that legal piece of paper. So the contract itself is legal, but one of the elements may not be, or one of the validities may not be. So there might be a minor, or it might be power of attorney. That's a good example.
I read in here that I didn't understand the part where it says minors can't be held. It was something like where minors can't be held responsible, but minors can hold like adults.
Mm-hmm. So unless it's brought up front,
Yeah.
it could go on to be a valid contract. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, okay.
So unless a party disaffirms it, if you and I entered a contract and I'm drunk, if I never come back and say, well, I was drunk at the time that I signed that, we could go on and
even if I was a minor.
well, no, that's different.
So it says something in here where.
So, So Brittany's talking about, we are on page.
Oh yeah, it's on 261. It says, in other words, an adult cannot hold a minor to a contract, but a minor can hold an adult to a contract.
Right.
What do you mean by that?
So an adult cannot hold a minor to it because they're a minor. But a minor doesn't have to get out of the contract.
Would
They
it
can
still
hold
be
an
void?
adult to it. No, they can, unless a party disaffirms it.
Okay.
That's the key, unless a party disaffirms it. Now, if somebody stands up and disaffirms it, now we got minors and we got, other illegal things going on. An unenforceable contract, it's valid between the parties, but nobody can sue for performance. It has an illegal element. It has all the legal elements, but so maybe it's an oral contract. You know, you can't sue somebody for an oral contract, 'cause now it's your word versus his or hers. But again, if nobody disaffirms it, you could continue on, you know, to end it, even though it's an oral. Oral contracts happen all the time, you know. Not in real estate contracts, but. So, what are the essential elements of a valid contract? We've got our legally competent parties. We said a minor. They have sufficient mental capacity to understand the nature and consequences of the contract. So they know when they sign exactly what they're signing. Another essential element is have mutual assent or deliberate agreement. This is offer and acceptance. This is the meeting of the minds. Do you want to buy my house? Yes. I'm going to give you X amount to buy your house. We got a deal. We have a meeting of the minds. We'll talk about more on that in just a minute, too. The legality, again, you can't have a valid contract on something for an illegal nature. And consideration. You don't have a contract if you don't have some sort of consideration. Now, in real estate, it's going to be money, right? It's going to be a purchase price. But consideration could be, I mean, it could just be anything. If I said, you want to buy my house, and you give me a goat, you know, if I think the goat is worth a consideration, then we could have a valid contract. Quiz time.
Dawn's like, what?
No, I didn't actually hear what she said.
Quiz time.
Oh, okay.
So a void contract is one that is
C.
a void.
D.
Say it real loud, Mike.
B.
Be like boy.
Be like void.
Not legally enforceable. Yep. Yeah. No legal effect.
It has all the, it lacks one or more of the elements, so it's not legally enforceable. The essential elements of any type of contract include all of the following except
B.
B.
Can't read that fast.
Would that not be B?
So the essential elements has to have the offer and acceptance, the competent parties, and the legal consideration. Agency disclosure is a different beast. Any questions so far? Moving right along. Our reality of consent, contract signed while a person is under duress or undue influence may be voidable by that person. May be voidable. So again, if I get into a contract and I'm drunk, that doesn't mean that I don't have to void it, right? I wake up the next day and say, yeah, that was a good deal, let's go for it. May be voidable. And then you got stuff like misrepresentation, fraud, mistake of fact. If we enter into a contract to buy 123 Main Street, and we're actually talking about 456 Main Street, we don't have a valid contract because we're not buying the right house, right? So any mistakes or anything like that. So be very, very careful when you're filling out your offer, purchase, and contracts. Make sure you're using the right information, the right form, and the right information. Because if that could come back, they could say, well, that's not the house that I wanted to buy. And anybody under duress or undue influence, you know, if you're dealing with somebody that's elderly or sick, just be cautious, knowing that they're making their right decisions. So, rejection of an offer. When a buyer presents an offer to a seller, the seller has three choices. They can accept it, they can reject it, or they can counter it. Okay? A rejection is just that. Thank you, but no thank you. The buyer either moves on or he brings a better offer. But a counteroffer, it's essentially a rejection, right? The seller's basically saying, whatever this term, I'm not happy with. However, should you consider this new term, then we can have a deal. So now the seller becomes the offerer, and the buyer becomes the offeree. What can the buyer do? The buyer can either accept it, reject it, or counter. You could counter all day long. There's no limit on how many times you can counter. This can keep going until somebody accepts it or rejects it. So communication to the agent is same as communication directly to the principal. Who's the principal? The buyer or seller. Their agent represents them. So the agents communicating with each other is the buyer and seller accepting and rejecting. Buyers and sellers very rarely meet until they get to closing, if they even meet then. So the agents are the ones that do the communicating. So as a buyer's agent, when you present an offer and the seller says, I accept, and you look at the clock and say, nah, it's 10 o'clock at night, I don't want to bother them with this tonight, and you go to bed, and you wake up in the morning, and the buyer says, no, I've changed my mind, it's too late. Communication was already made to the agent. The buyer's under contract. So be very, very careful. It's very important that you get information to your clients ASAP. And if you're negotiating and it's getting late, Mr. Buyer, how late are you taking calls tonight? You know, how late can we talk?
But if they, of course, if they don't, for example, the agent didn't look at his email and they did have, like, they sent him an offer, he didn't look at his email and then by the morning they say, hey, I don't want it anymore, then that's.
So the communication is not happening because the agent, right. So the buyer's agent's going to say, got it, you know, and let the seller agent know that he received it, but he just didn't want to bother his buyer that late at night. But he's already communicated that they have a deal.
Hold on, I have a question on this.
Sure.
I'm a little bit confused. So if the sellers, or the listing agent calls the buyer, agent, and says, we accept your offer. And the buyer agent.
Now, are you calling? Are you emailing? Are you faxing?
Let's say you email.
All right,
That's what
email,
you said.
okay.
You email and said, we accept your offer.
Okay.
And he responds back and says, okay, got it. So you're saying that buyer then is legally under contract,
They are under contract.
but they can still walk away, right?
Nope, they are under
They can't
contract.
walk away.
They are under contract. They're in their due diligence period. Sure, they can walk away in their due diligence period, but they owe the seller a due diligence check because
Okay,
they are under contract.
Okay,
Yeah. During the due diligence period, they could get out of it for any reason or no reason,
yeah.
but they still owe that seller. So even though they haven't gotten that check yet, yeah, they still owe the seller because they have a signed contract.
Okay.
Yep. This might be kind of a old snail mail rule. In this day and time, it doesn't take 5 days to get information to people. But in the event that you can't get something to somebody right away, you have 5 days. However, the commission says you use that more as the exception than the norm. We got email, we got fax, we got all sorts of great technology, text, you know. Probably about the only thing I could think of is if you had somebody, maybe an active military that's overseas or something, you know, they may not be able to get a hold of them right away, but then, even then, it's 2017, you know, we have the means to do it. So just make sure, you know, your buyers get a seller, your clients get a seller of everything they sign. They need to get a copy of that. And again, any changes to an offer is basically a rejection of the original offer and creates a counteroffer. Now, somebody can put an end to it. Somebody could say, look, this is my final offer, take it or leave it. You know, after it goes back and forth a few times, you know, you can kind of tell when you go back and forth a few times if you're going to be able to get close enough. But if you're still way apart on anything, purchase price, time, anything, and it's not looking good, and somebody is probably eventually going to call it so everybody can kind of move on. And if your buyer wants to come back to it, start all over. Draw them up a new offer and present it. So let's play out a little scenario, okay? So the buyer offers a purchase price of $150,000 with $250,000 in due diligence, $250,000 in earnest money, $1,500 in closing costs, and a closing date in 3 months. They want the home warranty and they want the refrigerator. Is this a contract? No. The seller says, no, I'm not paying any closing costs, you're not getting my refrigerator, and I need 6 weeks to closing. All other terms are acceptable.
Did
Is
they
this
write that refrigerator in the pictures? Like in their list of stuff? I thought the refrigerator stays.
This is our verbal offer.
Oh,
This is
okay.
not an official offer to purchase and contract. So no, we don't have serial numbers and
Oh, okay.
model numbers.
But she asked was a refrigerator. Is
The
the refrigerator a
Oh.
fixture? Yes or no?
I didn't hear the question, sorry.
Fridge is personal property.
Stoves.
Fridge is a negotiable term. So seller counter, 0 closing costs, no fridge, and 6 weeks to closing instead of 3 months. All other terms acceptable. Do we have a contract?